Welcome to Books and Brews Light number 50. We are here today with Lynne B. Stone, and this, I have to say, is a one-of-a-kind book that I have never interviewed anyone about before. And before we really get into it, do you know if there are other books similar to yours?
There are some books out there that are death planning or end of life planning books. Some people would look at the "I'm Dead Now What" series as kind of,
Okay.
a little bit of levity to the topic, but
Mhm.
that's probably the closest thing that you get. Mine, kind of along those same lines, but I definitely take a different perspective
Okay.
because I add in the perspective of being a widow. And so
Okay.
I put in the things that I've learned through my personal experience and from the experiences of other widows and
Mhm.
widowers, and try to incorporate that into this book so that there's just more to it than, planning out with wills and trusts and insurance and that. There's
Right.
just so much more to planning than what people even consider. So that was the
Right.
gist of it.
Um, my husband has been through that. His first wife passed away after a very terrible long illness,
Mm,
and so he is on top of all of that. He's got
yeah.
all of that where I know where to find it.
Yes.
So a lot of times I don't do a drink on Books and Brews Light, but for this one I did. And so I have
Ooh.
something very unique. This is called Jefferson's Ocean Aged at Sea, blend of straight bourbon whiskeys, very small batch. This is, I forget the number. I think it's voyage number 31. And
Mm,
I thought the first time I ever had anything like bourbon or whiskey was actually at a friend's memorial service. And
okay.
that was something that was in Scotland, and it was called Glaive because it was her favorite. I'm going to get it wrong whether I say whiskey or bourbon. But so what's unique about Jefferson's Aged at Sea is they're not kidding. They literally put big barrels on the prow of ships sailing around the world. And
Wow.
it started with this man just being very curious when he saw, I think it was his bourbon. Yeah, I have to keep checking. Whiskey, bourbon whiskey. Um, and he was curious when he saw his friend's bourbon on his boat, how would that affect aging? And so he got people like commercial tankers, that kind of thing, to put these barrels on the prow of the ship. And they keep track of everywhere these ships go, what the weather conditions were,
Wow.
and look at how that affects the taste. So this, I think 31 stayed mainly in the Caribbean and is meant to have a very briny flavor. So
Mm.
I'd say that's briny. And that's the kind of taste I like. Not going to be everybody's thing. But have you ever heard of 19 Crimes, the
I have
wine?
not. No.
Okay. It's a similar concept where they sort of weave a story into the
Mm.
batches of wine. And so 19 Crimes refers to the 19 crimes in England in Victorian age, maybe, that could get you sent to Australia. And so each bottle, it's really cool. Each bottle has a photograph of an actual person who was sent to Australia.
Wow.
And if you scan it with your phone, it kind of comes to life and starts telling you that person's story in first person.
Wow. That's
And that,
really
of course,
cool.
it really is. And even if you don't like wine, there's this part of you that goes, I want to get that.
Yeah,
And
I
so
want to
it's,
learn more.
yeah, so it's similar with this in that every single batch has its own voyage that it went on.
Cool.
So it's really an incentive. But of course, the downside is if you really like it, there's not going to be a whole lot of it.
Right.
So,
That's really
but
cool. I like that. I'll have to check it
yeah,
out.
yeah, it's well, to me it's pricey, but I come from a different background than my husband. So um go ahead and tell my audience who you are and how this book came to be.
Absolutely. So my name is Lynn Stone, and I wrote this book as kind of it was an incentive for me to help other people to do their planning for end of life plans. And it's not a topic that a lot of people like to discuss or really think about, but it's something that everybody should do. And interestingly, the people that I've talked to where I've, presented this book, they're like, oh, I've been trying to get my mom to have this conversation. She doesn't want to talk about it. Or, my dad passed away. He had all these things and I had to take care of everything. And, I'm just preparing for myself. So it kind of hits everybody a little different way. I wrote this book to help people, but I also wrote it from the perspective of my own personal experiences. So my husband passed away 10 years ago, very unexpected. And we didn't have anything really set up at all. We didn't have a will. We didn't have a trust. We had life insurance. That's probably the only thing that we did have,
Hmm.
of all of the things. And so it was very hard for me going through that. And so I didn't want other people to go through that if they could help it. So I wanted to just kind of be an advocate for getting that conversation started. And so, there's other books out there on the market that do deal with end of life planning and that kind of thing. My book is slightly different from that because it definitely comes from a widow's perspective. So it's kind of broken down into three sections. The first section is kind of the business end of things, taking care of the will, the trust, the insurance, all that stuff. And then I talk about your family, who, doing your planning, for funeral planning, thinking about if you have small children, what their schedules are. Because if you have a small child, like I have a small child, I actually have two children. I have a 17-year-old and I have a 16-month-old. So I have a huge
Hmm.
gap. And so, I think about what if something happens to me, what happens to my kids? And so, like, what is their schedule? What is their routine? Who are their doctors? What are they like? So, this is something that it kind of evolves with you as you evolve.
Hmm.
Um, but it definitely puts that topic on, makes you think about it so that you can really articulate what your wishes are for your family. And that's not just for immediate family. You might have people that like family members that live with you, maybe someone with special needs, someone that's older, or something happens to you, what happens to them. Maybe you have animals that you are, those are your children, so you want to take care of them, make sure that they have the vet appointments and special meals or whatever that they have. Or I mean, some people are even plant people, so like they get
Right.
really serious about their
Right.
plants, so but the
Yeah.
watering and the fertilize and all that. So I talk about that, and then I shift it to the household, because a lot of people don't think about, everyone's so consumed about that stuff, but they don't think about the household. So I talk about how in a lot of relationships there is kind of this division of work. So
Right.
you have cooking, you have the ones that do the cooking, the cleaning, you have the ones that do the yard work, you have all of that. And so I talk about that and getting to understand all of those pieces, because when your person passes away, if that was their thing and you didn't really pay any attention
Right.
because you were too busy doing your thing, now you're
Well,
in a problem.
I've just recently dealt with a dog whose owner died, and
Cool.
it went to, I think it was a sister-in-law. They weren't really equipped to deal with this dog, largely because he's a Great Pyrenees,
Big
and
dog.
fences don't hold him. And they
He's
have
huge.
this, right, right. And all they had was this little flimsy fence. And very bad luck for them. They lived across the street from a processing plant.
Oh.
So you can imagine this dog was forever jumping the fence and getting into the bones there,
Hmm.
which is a huge problem for the processing plant because, they're going to end up in serious trouble. And so these people were keeping him on a chain outside and realized you just can't make a dog like this live on a chain forever. So he came to me and things were great until he and my dog fought over food. And
Oof.
the third time they did it and I tried to separate them, I got bitten. And so it was like they didn't know anything about this dog. They didn't know if he'd had his vaccinations. And so we did find someone to take him who's taking wonderful care of him and has the time and the knowledge to really
Mm.
integrate him. But she's coming to me, what was his previous life like? Was he indoors? Was he outdoors? I'm like, I don't know.
Right.
Um, and they ended up not knowing what medications he had, what vaccinations he'd had. And then talking about the household, I'm still in that same position in that we live on a farm and we definitely have a division of labor. And
Yep.
so my husband loves his Kubota tractor.
Mhm.
He'll drive that thing just for fun.
Oh yeah,
If I have to work on the farm, it's going to be a very steep learning curve for me. And
absolutely.
so I really appreciate what you're saying. And I think there is that element in everybody's life.
Mhm. And I really do try to pull that out. Like I think, we don't necessarily think about all the things. And so, you know, so with your husband working at, being on the farm and knowing he's the one that does all that stuff, but it would be like in my book, I talk about, learning how to operate the equipment. How do you start it? How do you like just
Mhm,
general things about it? I talk about learning about your car, like learning about where the property lines are, learning
mhm.
about like where the shut off valves are for your house for like the water or for natural gas or whatever. Those things that we take for granted because there's someone else that knows how to do those things, right? So I talk about
Right.
that a lot. I talk about, the special recipes that you might have or the equipment that you might have and where it's at in the kitchen or, how you
Mhm.
do laundry or how you do the things because whenever your person dies, the person that did those things, you're really
Right.
left in a lurch. You
So
really have to figure it out.
does it tend to be geared more for women or pretty equally for both men and women?
Yeah, I think it's pretty equal across the board because I had a kind of I guess a more standard upbringing and that, the female did the cooking, the cleaning, the child rearing, and the man did the outside stuff and whatever. So like that was kind of my upbringing. But when I was writing the book, I considered that that's not always the case. Like that's, sometimes the roles are reversed. Sometimes the man is the
Right.
cook and sometimes, so like really I try to keep it very neutral in
Right.
that not assigning specific roles and really neutral. Even the title of the book kind of implies that it's for like a married couple, but
Right.
really it's for anybody. I mean, anyone can benefit from this book because it does bring out all those things that you might not think about. So the person that had the dog, like they never considered what happens. Who does this dog go to,
Right.
and what do they need to know about the dog and all that stuff. So I mean it's the
Mhm.
same concept. And then so I talk about that, and then the third part I talk about embracing the living, like embracing life. Now a lot of times we find ourselves behind the camera. Sometimes there's always that one person that doesn't want to be on camera because the outfit
Yep.
doesn't look right, or they feel like they look fat and they don't want to be like all those things, right? And
Mhm.
so I encourage that get in the pictures, go on vacation, go do the things that you keep talking about but never
Right.
wind up doing. And talking about making memories, because really whenever one of you goes, the other will be highly reliant on those memories, will be reliant on those pictures, all of those things. So just really try to focus on all of, like, I just bring it all
And I
out.
think this has kind of come out for whatever reason in multiple of my interviews lately, this idea of thinking about the end of your life.
Mm,
And I think it was my last guest said she was told, imagine you're 90. What do you want to look back on your life? And in
mhm.
a way, you're saying the same thing, don't get so caught up in the mundane things,
Right.
but
Well,
go out
and
there and make memories.
absolutely, because I mean, truly, and that's purely whenever your person dies, that's what you're left with. You're left with the memories. That's what you're left with the pictures. You're left with the knickknacks. You're left with all those things,
Hmm.
except for the person that helped make them. So
Right.
like, that's what I try to strive for people to do, those things that like just get, and if, I also kind of talk about the people that are going through cancer. So interestingly, a cousin of mine, a distant cousin, had reached out to me. Her husband was going through, or is still currently going through cancer treatments. And she says, do you think your book could help me? And I said, yeah, I think it could. I mean, I talk about a bunch of different things to think about and consider. And I said, I think you should especially look at the last part because I talk about different ideas of things that you can do. So, knowing that you've got a terminal illness, you could write letters to your loved ones while you're still in the right frame of mind.
Hmm.
You can record videos, you can take pictures, you can like those Build-A-Bear things where you can record a message and have it for your grandkids or something like that. Do fingerprints so that after you're gone, your family can make jewelry with it. I mean, or do
Hmm.
tattoos or something like that. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it was just a really enlightening conversation with her to just kind of give her some ideas of things. And
Yeah.
really, he's doing a little better on the treatments, but just they've been doing those things. I follow her on Facebook, and
Yeah.
I've been seeing some of the things that they've been doing. I'm like, I know where you got that idea. I like it.
No, I am curious. This book came out, what, January 1st of this year, I think.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
And so there are about 9 years between your husband's passing and the book coming out. Did you deliberately wait? Did you think right away about doing this, or did it occur to you later?
I well, yeah, it was probably about halfway through. I was probably about 5 or 6 years into it whenever I thought about, you know, wanting to give back in some way, wanting to do something to help other people. But I really wasn't sure how to do that. And I thought, well, maybe I'll write a book or something. So
Mhm.
I started writing it, and then I do sections. I kind of got the outline, and I'd start filling in, and I'd jump around because there was other stuff I wanted to do. And then I'd get sidetracked and not touch it for a while. And then I'd pick
Mhm.
it back up and do that again. And so I kind of did that off and on for about 4 or 5 years. And then
Mhm.
last year in June, I had a baby. So I was
Mhm.
on maternity leave. So I had a little bit of extra time on my hands while he was napping. And, fortunately, my mom had come down, and she was helping me with him. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to finish my book. So I finished writing it, and I, had worked with a service to get it all up to par. And so then I just published it in January. So I'm just finally like put a little bow on it and be done with it.
Had you written anything before,
No.
like a book? Okay. So did it seem pretty daunting to you?
Uh, not really. I think for me, the most important thing was I didn't want to leave anything out. I wanted to make sure that I was capturing everything, like even things that didn't necessarily pertain to me, but I knew would pertain to other people.
Right.
So like one of the examples I have would be I put in there about pool maintenance.
Mhm.
It's something to learn. If you have a swimming pool, you need to know how to put the chemicals
Yep.
in, how to clean it, all that stuff. I don't have a swimming pool, but I thought, someone might need to know how to do that.
Right.
So like I was just trying to just think about all the possible options, all the things that people might need to that what they might encounter that they would need to consider.
Uh,
Um,
I'm curious, did you kind of do for each section, like tell this is how you take care of a pool and this is how you work a lawnmower? Or was it
well,
more you have to think about this ahead of time?
yeah. So actually, um, if you're all right with it, I have my book.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
one of the things, so I talk about, for example, like we'll just talk about the household outdoor chores, and I talk about. All right, so I'll just read it. So working outside in the yard has traditionally been seen as the man's domain, involving tasks like mowing the grass, tending to flower beds, trimming bushes, and managing the garden and sprinkler systems. Ideally, this is a job best tackled together, but often it's managed by one person or the duties are divided, and never the twain shall meet. For a spouse left to handle these tasks without guidance, it can feel overwhelming. To make things easier, here's a breakdown of the different aspects of outdoor work that might come in handy one day. Shining a light on the outdoor chores is not just about aesthetics, it's about providing a space where they can feel connected to you and the memories you shared in the home you created together. Equipment care. When my husband passed away, I knew how to operate the riding mower, push mower, and leaf blower. However, I was less confident with the weed trimmer and edger. These were mostly my late husband's things. There was a lot to learn, and thankfully, YouTube was a great help. Inventory and organization. Take stock. Create an inventory of all outdoor tools and equipment from lawn mowers and trimmers to shovels and hoses. Note their locations and accessories. Organize by use. Store tools based on their use, such as gardening, lawn care, or snow removal. Maintenance routines, regular cleaning. Share cleaning routines you have, such as washing tools after use or wiping down equipment to prevent rust. Seasonal maintenance. Explain seasonal maintenance tasks like sharpening mower blades in the spring or winterizing equipment before cold weather hits. So I kind of go
Hmm.
like step by step, like just things to think about, things to prompt the conversation.
Right.
And I don't pretend to know everything there is to know about it, but really
Hmm.
just trying to hit the highlights. And my hope
Okay.
is that in having that kind of a conversation, it will lead to other things that I
Right.
just don't cover, but that should be
Right.
part of the conversation.
Because I
So,
was thinking that would be a massively huge book.
oh yeah,
If
yeah.
if
Well,
you
I mean,
covered,
and absolutely. Talk about daunting. Yes, that would be daunting. But
right.
I
Well,
talk about things like the seasonal stuff because I live in Southeast Georgia. We get it's mostly hot, but we don't get snow except for last year. We did get some ice, but that's not something we really have to deal with. But
That's because we moved down here from northern Minnesota, and ever since we've been here,
is
we've
that
been
what
having
happened? You brought
that's
it?
what happened. We've been having terrible winters, like the kind they haven't seen here in 30 years.
Yeah,
So
it's
I
been cold.
apologize.
Now I know who to blame here. I thought it was me all along because I came from
Now,
Pennsylvania.
now
So
you know, but I'm giving you free publicity, so you have to forgive me.
that's okay. Well, you know what? We'll both take the blame. It'll work.
Yeah, it's been hard. When we were up in northern Minnesota, we had our rabbits and chickens in a detached garage for the winter.
Oh,
We don't have that here, so it doesn't get to 45 below zero here.
right.
But
Big
it,
difference.
last couple winters it has gotten down to 0, 5, I think even 5 below, and that's been
That's
kind of
cold.
scary. Like, just how cold can they really stand it? So we try to insulate and do all these things. Um, so as you've talked to various people, what do you think are some of the biggest things that they haven't prepared for and didn't think about?
Well, from what I'm gathering, because I've talked to a bunch of different people, and it seems like the biggest thing is there are a lot of people that just don't want to have the conversation at all. They don't want to talk about it. They just feel like they're I don't want to say they feel like they're invincible, but it's just
Mhm.
that like just don't ask, don't tell type of thing.
Uh-huh.
And so I think it's, getting them to recognize that you don't necessarily have to figure it all out at once, but you do need to do
Mhm.
something. And so I've actually been invited to go and speak for a couple different groups, and I do it more as a call to action. And I talk
Mhm.
about that in the book too, but it's more about, getting some documents done up front, the stuff that you need while you're living.
Right.
Um, get those taken care of, and then you can focus on your end of life planning. So I talk about doing power of attorneys, your medical power of attorney, doing advanced directives, or some people like to look at the 5 wishes thing. So those are
And
the
what
big.
what are the 5 wishes?
It's I don't have it off the top of my head, but it's 5 questions that they ask you, and it's about how you want to be treated, like how if something happens to you, what do you want to have done? Like and
Mhm.
it's an exercise. I mean, anyone can go out and just Google 5 wishes, and it'll pull up,
Okay.
and it'll prompt you through that. You can just fill it out, and honestly, you just Google medical power of attorney, advanced directive, and all those documents will pull up. I mean, you can probably get them for free, depending on where you look. But it's just, or some people don't feel comfortable with that. They don't feel confident. But it's like, go talk to an estate planning attorney. They can do all that stuff for you for relatively cheap, but it shouldn't cost more than a couple $100.
Mhm.
And then, of course, the big thing is do it and then give it
Right.
to somebody. It doesn't do
Right.
you any good if it's sitting in your safe deposit box, right? You need to give it to
That
your
nobody can
people.
get into. Right.
Exactly, exactly. But
So,
it's just about making sure that your voice is known. That when you can't have a voice, and it could be, if you're incapacitated, or if something happens. And actually my mom was just telling me about a friend of hers whose mother had wound up going into the hospital, had a stroke, and now she's non-communicative. She can't
mhm.
speak. And so now the daughter has to do all the things for her, but she doesn't know what her mom's wishes are. And so it's just a kind of, I mean, it's just a really difficult time because she just doesn't know. And
Right.
so, all these things that people are trying to figure out, but that's kind of the way I'm like, everyone just needs to just get in gear and just do it.
Uh-huh.
Just
Do you
do
want
it.
to talk a little bit about what happens when there's no will? I assume it varies state to state, but I think that can be a massive, huge problem, and people don't, they assume that it's just going to go to the next of kin.
Yeah, it can be pretty nasty. It does depend on the state. A lot of people assume that it'll just go to the next of kin, to the spouse, and if the spouse is no, if there's no surviving spouse, it would go to the kids. Um, Typically, their attorneys have to get involved no matter what. It just gets, the people, it goes to the state. It depends on the state. Sometimes they'll just sell off your stuff, auction your stuff for the estate of the person,
Uh-huh.
to pay everything back, and then they divide assets. But each place is going to be just a little different. So, and even in the book, I do tell people, like, just go to your attorney where you live, get the information that you need as it relates to your state, because like we said, every place is different. But even if you have a will, you still have to go through the probate process. And so that costs money. It gets very expensive to go through the probate process and to have an attorney. And, a lot of people that have even done a will, they're like, I don't care. It's not my problem. But what
Uh-huh.
happens then is that the family is left with the bill for putting the will into probate,
Hmm.
paying the attorney, and then, waiting for the time to lapse. And then,
Now, why does it have to go to probate? Maybe I don't understand what probate is, but why does it have to do that if there is a will?
so whenever it depends on it depends on how it's written, and it depends on the state. But some states require you to go through the probate process,
Hmm.
and some of them will go based on the will, unless there's something in the will that has to go through probate. So but like sometimes it's about property, sometimes it's about your belongings, sometimes it's about the division of like the division of assets, the
Hmm.
heirs. It just depends on each person's situation. So
Oh, that sounds like they've kind of got you coming and going.
oh,
That
absolutely,
you're going to
absolutely.
pay one way or the other. So,
Yes.
um,
And
what, yeah, what is your best advice to aspiring writers?
I think the best thing I can suggest is to write it out and have a couple people read it, like just, in bits and pieces. If you don't feel like you're comfortable writing the whole thing. And, you can get some feedback, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction. There's always, if it's nonfiction, you can always kind of fact check it. If
Mhm.
it's fiction, of course, then it's just about the flow and, what you're looking for in your
Right.
in your characters and that
Well,
kind of
even
thing.
even in fiction, fact checking is huge. If
What?
you if you write something that is not factually accurate, there will be somebody out there who knows, and they're
Absolutely.
not going to be able to finish your book.
Absolutely. And that's why I suggest, have some people kind of read it as you're working through it. Not necessarily to do any editing or anything other than just to read it, to consume it, and to
Yeah.
kind of give feedback on it. And so I think like I would do that. So I would read like portions of what I had written to my boyfriend at the time, and I would just read through it, and he would be like, "Well, what about this?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, what about that?" So then I would kind of like just kind of fuel the thought process a little bit more, help me build it out. And so I think that's the biggest thing is just seeking help, especially if you're a first timer,
Yep.
seeking the guidance from others to
Yeah.
input whatever, and then incorporate as you feel is appropriate.
Yeah, I think it's so important. I think the best thing I ever did was joined a writer's critique group, and they have been so helpful. I'm supposed to still be going by Zoom, and I'm just there's so much going on around here that sometimes it's hard to say I'm just going to take 2 hours
Right.
and go to this. Like today was interesting. We spotted one of the little ram lambs. One of his horns had gotten torn off or knocked
Oh,
off somehow. Yeah, and it was bleeding. And these sheep don't want to be caught. So
oh
we
yeah.
had somehow my farmhand Terry and I we had to figure out how to catch
Mm,
him, how to isolate him, how to get him in a place where we could actually work.
mhm.
And it's like, okay, so there is another hour and a half of my day gone that I didn't plan on. I had to go
Nope.
research what to do about this. Then I had to find the equipment to do it. Then we had to isolate him. Then we had to
Mhm.
do it. Then we had to bring him all his food and water so he could be
No.
kept alone so that we can keep working on his horn every day to take care
Mhm.
of it. So, yeah, life doesn't go according to plan, which is sorry,
Right.
night writers, why I haven't been there in a while. But I do want to get back to that because it is so, so important to do
Yeah.
that.
Well,
And
and so go ahead.
I think that some people are overly confident in their writing,
Yeah.
and I think that to write a really good book, you need an element of humility. You need to
Mhm.
be able to listen to other people and consider what they're saying, and at the same time, you also need to be strong enough and confident to really weigh things carefully
Right.
and maybe sometimes say that's not really where this book should go.
Right. Absolutely. And so interestingly, I had written about three quarters of the book, and I'm like, okay, I'm just I'm getting burnt out because I was getting overwhelmed. So I'm like, there's just so much that I still need to do.
Yep.
And so I had enlisted the help of a ghostwriter just to kind of just like help me get through this part. And
Mhm.
so yeah, like she would write a little bit and I'm like right there with her. Like she's writing and I'm like checking behind her, like reading everything. And I'm like, no, I think blah 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 blah, or yeah, that sounds good, or blah, blah. Like
Mhm.
adding in like my little pieces to it. So I mean, she wrote a good bit of it, and then I had kind of massaged it a little bit to be more about how I would say it because it's I just
Yeah,
want to make sure that I'm getting the point across the right way. But having a good editor, of course, and then someone that can go through and get the wording right because I tend to use different phrases and stuff that might not come across to everybody the same way.
right,
So, yeah.
right. Well, my husband, within probably 6 or 8 months after his wife died, yeah, probably about 6 to 8 months, he had written a book called The Path That Shines, and
Mm,
it's both personal, but it's also about dealing with complex medical issues because she had multiple issues, most of which were rare. She had specialists, she had like a dozen specialists for each of these conditions. And so part of it is to try and be a little bit of a guide for doctors and nurses because each one of them, okay, they're a specialist in this thing, but not in the other 10 or
right,
11.
right,
And so he was kind of learning all of this and figuring out how to piece it all together. So, but he did hire an editor and he was really, really happy with that.
mhm.
Whereas, I write fiction, I've read a lot in my life. Um, but I do think that's a good way to go for an awful lot of people.
Yeah. I think it was very helpful and it was kind of empowering because I was able to put my stuff forward and put my ideas out there and then they were able to take it and kind of maneuver it a little bit so that it was a little bit more digestible for other people.
Right.
And of course on I'm like, yeah, that's what I was trying to say. I don't know why I couldn't say it that way, but yeah, that's
Because they have
perfect.
more experience. Yeah.
More
So what
experience and different perspectives.
Well, and they're also coming at it fresh, and that's
Yes.
one of the biggest problems if you don't let the book sit. So for me, yeah, I do all my own editing, but I let the book sit for, minimum 6 weeks before I come back for the next draft,
Hmm.
because otherwise things are so clear in your mind
Right.
if you go right back to it that you don't realize it doesn't make sense.
Right.
Whereas if you let it sit for 6 weeks, 3 months, and go back, you look at that line and go, was I drunk? What does that even mean? But
Right.
with giving yourself that space, so that's part of why they can do it because they're coming to it fresh. Now,
Yeah.
I was curious about your publication journey.
Yeah, so it actually went fairly well. I mean, I went through the urban writers. That's who I
Okay.
used to help me. So, like all of it. So the copywriter, the editor, the ghostwriter, all like they just helped me do all the things and get everything ready, the cover art, everything. Um, so it was a one-stop shop for me. I went to them. They did every piece that I needed them to do. Um, I think if I were to do it again, I would probably do it as a package instead of the piecemeal. Uh, but I thought I was being smart, and that wasn't exactly it. Um,
Well, live and learn.
exactly, exactly. But I publish through Amazon, and of course they have their own requirements. So I think working with a group that was familiar with those requirements,
Yep.
I didn't have to guess. I didn't have to do trial and error. Like I relied heavily on them to make sure that it was
Right.
in compliance.
Yep.
But I honestly didn't have any issues whenever it came time to actually hit the button. It was actually a pretty smooth, seamless process.
Hmm.
So,
That's good. And what about marketing? Because every writer wants to know what works.
you know, I I made an author page on Amazon and I put some information out there. I made a Facebook page for my author page, and I joined a local book authors group down here, and we actually have gone out and we've done. I'll be going on. I guess it's next week, next Saturday. Next Saturday, I'll be going to a art league, coastal art league,
Okay.
and we'll be doing a book festival, like a little signing meet and greet type thing there.
Hmm.
So just kind of getting out, engaging with the public. I mean, the topic of my book is kind of hard to
Yeah.
really kind of
Yeah.
get out and like shake hands and say, "Oh, look at my book! It's talking about end of life planning. Awesome, right?"
Well, let's talk about death.
Yeah, let's talk about death. And I last month I went to a health fair, and I kind of came up with my little tagline, like where I talk about this is something a topic that no one wants to talk about, but everyone needs to talk about. And it
Hmm.
was interesting because people that have experienced death within like the last few years came and talked to me. Like they stopped,
Uh-huh.
they saw it, they're like, wanting to know more, and I got to hear their stories. And I'm very, I guess, empathetic, uh sympathetic, like they get to tell them their story and they start
Yep.
crying and I start crying, and like I'm giving hugs in the middle of the self there because I don't know these people, but like I'm just engaging with them, and it's just a very touching moment. But
Yep.
um, just try to get it out there, and talking about this topic is just it's
So one
necessary.
one thing I forgot to ask you earlier, and I was curious again with something you said, does this end up being sort of a workbook where there's space to write all this stuff in, or is it more get yourself a notebook and take care of all of this stuff?
It's definitely right now, definitely more of a get a notebook and just kind of work your way
Okay.
through it.
Mhm.
I was working, well, I was, excuse me, I was thinking about doing a workbook to go to accompany it, but
Yeah.
it's like to do this, it almost has to be like a binder, because every person's personal circumstances are going to be so
Right.
different. Because
Right.
like coming up with a schedule for the kids, like one of the things I talk about with the kids is oh, where's it at? That's planning. Talk about doing the like this is it. Diet. Yes, kids. I talk about schedules and routines. I talk about their diet, their care and their health, their education, custody wishes. Yeah, thinking about if something happens to me, where does my daughter go? Right? Where does the baby go? Who do they go with? And that kind of stuff. Or so in my personal situation, when my husband died, it was me, him, our daughter, and then he had a son to a previous marriage that was
Okay.
living who was living with us, and he was 13. And so whenever my husband died, very unexpectedly, I called my stepson's mom and I said, "Hey, I'm just letting you know he died, and we'll be doing. I don't know anything yet, but as soon as I know, I'll tell you." So we had a funeral on Friday, buried on Friday, and then Saturday, my stepson was on the plane to go back to Pennsylvania, which was
Oh, wow.
well, that was the plan originally because it was
Yeah.
spring break. So we knew that he
Mhm.
was going. That was fine.
Okay.
Ticket was already paid for. What I didn't know was that he wasn't coming back.
Mhm.
And so while he was up there, and she never said anything to me, and she just, put him in school, and I kind of linked it to like just plucking him out of his life here in Georgia and like just dropping him in Pennsylvania and
Yeah.
thinking that everything was going to work fine. And so that was really very difficult for both my daughter and I to go through, and for him to work through,
Hmm.
because, it was just such a sudden change that we didn't see coming. We were completely
Yeah.
blindsided. So I do talk a little bit about that and making sure that it's known that if something happens, to the custodial parent,
Yep.
what happens to the other children, to the children. So
Right.
just all those personal experiences kind of woven in. So
You have, what is some of your best advice for widows? I actually have three or four friends who have kind of abruptly become widowed
yeah.
in the last few years.
It's hard. I think the best advice I have, well, the best advice I have for someone who's newly widowed is to do not make any major financial decisions if you can help it.
Hmm.
And if you have to move or whatever, then you have to take care of yourself. But if you're a little further out, or even if it's relatively new, I would definitely make sure that you update any type of beneficiary stuff that you have,
Hmm.
update your will, update or create a will, your advance directive, your power of attorneys, like get all that legal stuff taken care of. That way there's no question about what should happen with your stuff. Um, I think the other thing is that it's people people can be very predatory. And so, widows, we have, and it's, widow is something, widowhood is something that happens to people. It doesn't
Yep.
necessarily define a person. But there will be things that a person will go through as a widow that other people just can't possibly understand. Like a widow will lose like half of their circle almost immediately. Like if their spouse passes away, they lose those connections. Their friends fall away, the family, becomes estranged. I mean, it's just a very difficult process. Um, so I think for those people, for the new widows and the older widows, the ones who are a little bit more seasoned, I guess, um, therapy, definitely recommend getting therapy, counseling. It can be one-on-one, it can be group therapy. I mean, and I think the other thing is just to give yourself some grace.
Yep.
People like to put timelines on other people. Like they want to put a timeline on a widow and say, well, you've been grieving too long, or it's too soon, and you already have somebody new, and
Yeah.
there's
That's,
there's there's no timeline on it, but
yeah.
people like to put timelines on it.
That's what my husband ran into. And he lost a friend, I think in part. It also had to do with politics. The person didn't like that
Mm,
he changed his views. But I think
mhm,
it was also partly that this couple had been friends with him and his wife, and they resented me because I met him very shortly after she
mm,
died.
mhm.
And they, I think, really resented me. And I was shocked myself. I didn't realize how near to when I met him she had died. And when we finally talked about that, he said she was sick for so long. And there had been a lot of things. There had been open heart surgery, there had been these other conditions. And so he kept saying, he's always said, I did my grieving in that
Mhm.
year and a half, 2 years while she was sick.
Yeah,
But for other people, it was very hard. And they
yeah,
felt like he was just skating on. And he's like, no, I've been grieving for a year and a half. I
yeah.
knew what was coming. And so that either way, yes, people are very judgmental about how long you should grieve for.
Yeah. And that's, I think, and that's a really hard thing for a person, for a widower to deal with, is,
Hmm.
these manufactured timelines that are being placed on them of what they think is enough
Right.
time or not enough time. And,
Yep.
I have a neighbor who lost his wife earlier this year, and she had been kind of like your husband's wife, just battling all these
Hmm.
different issues. And for her, it was for years. And so, I had reached out to him after she had passed, and I said, "Hey, there's no timeline on this. If you should happen to find someone that makes you happy, that brings you joy, you've been grieving your wife for years because you knew that this was coming, you just didn't know when.
Right.
So, if you need
Are
someone in your corner, I'm here."
are
So,
you familiar with the movie called I'll Be Home for Christmas?
I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
Okay. It's one of the few that we'll watch over and over, usually around Christmas time. And
Yeah.
there is a scene in there where you eventually find out the I don't know if he's meant to be like in a high school boarding school or a very young college student, but he's gone to this school, I think it's a boarding school, to get away from his father because he remarried 10 months after his mother died.
Mm,
And there is a hilarious scene where he's in a restaurant. He's trying to convince the waitress to go home to her husband. And they're having this conversation in which he says, well, if you understood the situation, you'd know that his mother, or that his father married his mother 10 months after married his stepmother 10 months after his mother died. And the guy at the table that the waitress is trying to serve says, she must have been a babe. And they give him a dirty look. And he turns back to the waitress he's trying to convince and says, don't you think 10 months is a little too soon? And the guy at the table goes, not if she's a babe. And it's just, it's very irreverent, but it does kind of speak to this idea
mhm.
that other people want you to grieve on their timeline. And life
Yeah.
doesn't always work out that way. And also there's a movie called Blended with Drew Barrymore and
Yep.
Adam Sandler. And there is that scene where he's talking to his daughter, and he says, I can never love anyone else. You know, your mother said I had a heart big enough for two. And in fact, that's all she talked about before she died was you need to not live in grief. You need to go
Yep.
find someone else and move on with your life.
Yeah.
And that was a conversation that my husband had with his wife,
Mhm.
which probably also impacted that he was willing and able to move on
Move
sooner
forward.
than other people wanted him to,
Yeah.
because there she is telling him, we have a daughter, go out and find someone, be
Yeah.
happy, find someone who can love our daughter and be a mother to her. And he
Yeah.
did. And
Yeah.
not everybody appreciated it, but you know what? We're happy.
Yeah. So interestingly, whenever I decided to start dating, it was probably about 6 months after my husband had passed, because you get, when your person passes away, they're your everything. Like they are
Yep.
your every day and night, like everything. And so, like you used to sharing the bed together, you're used to, like,
Yep.
you have your routine. And so they call it skin hunger. Like you, you get skin hunger, like you just miss being held, you miss having
Yep.
that relationship. And so I was lonely. I mean, yeah, I had my daughter, but I was still lonely. So I started dating, and I actually went to my in-laws. I'm still very close with them,
Mhm.
and I asked them for permission. I asked them for permission to, like, or not necessarily permission, but I asked for their blessing
Their blessing,
for
yeah.
to be able to, that I was wanting to go and, see if I could find someone else. I mean, not trying to replace him, but just to keep going. And they
Right.
were both very, very understanding, that, like, and very supportive. Like, you're still young, go and find someone that makes you happy. So it's been a journey in itself. I could probably write a whole separate book about that, but
Yeah.
we won't
Well,
worry about that part.
that brings us to the question, do you have any plans to write another book?
I do actually. I have a plan to write three more books.
Oh, wow.
That's very specific, but
Mhm.
and your husband can probably attest to this. There is not really anything on the market that talks about the grief journey, like as far as what to expect. Like what does a person go through, what to expect. And so the next books I'm going to write will be, about the grief journey and about the widow journey, as far as, what to expect of that first year, the year of
Mhm.
first, and, dealing with the all of the constant reminders, the holidays, the birthdays, the anniversaries, all of the things, and talking about that, talking about money, talking about family, talking about people crawling out of the woodwork thinking that you've got, all these resources now that you can impart to them.
What,
And
do
then,
they assume you got a big life insurance settlement or
oh,
something?
absolutely, absolutely, yes, yeah. I think that's where everyone's like, oh well, or like, oh well, they were government employees, so they, that they got insurance, that they got
Mhm.
benefits. So then they're like, coming out with hands out, looking for a handout. So
That's
um,
way beyond tacky to do to a new widow.
it is, but manipulation is, and I'll tell you, like, there's also a thing called widow's fog, where
Mhm.
you are just, you're there and you're kind of functioning, but your memories, like, it's just like you're just like kind of like surreal, like you're kind of like just watching
Right.
yourself playing out, but you're kind of there, like kind of checked out, kind of not there. So
Mhm.
talking about that, and then also talking about, just the first experiences that people go through whenever their person passes away, just that first year.
Mhm.
And then, so the second book will be coming out of the fog, like whenever you
Okay.
realize that, life's still going, and you got to pick yourself up and keep going, and kind of like whenever reality actually hits. The
Mhm.
year of first is hard. The second year
Yep.
is harder because the numbness wears off. And
That's
so,
interesting. I wouldn't have expected that.
yeah, I mean, and I'm sure after we're done here, you should have a really good conversation with your husband about this, because he can probably tell you that that's what happens. You're in a fog, and then after that first year, and I mean, it's like you feel like you're just going through hell, going through
Mhm.
it. I mean, it's just, you like all experiencing all these things. People people that you thought would always be there for you that aren't. Like they just kind of drift away, or they, they stop calling because they don't feel comfortable. Or, for women, when they lose their husbands, now they're new on the street, and like now all of a sudden, now you're on the market. Now you're going to steal their husbands. So now
Really,
you're kind
people
of
think like
chastised.
that.
Oh my gosh, yes. Like they kind of push you away. Like you're no longer
Mhm.
in that circle anymore. They don't want you to do that. So it gets very crazy. So that's the first year. Second year, you're still dealing with that a little bit. And just trying to get adjusted to life, the new norm, if you will.
Mhm.
And then the third book is stepping into, like, just being willing to accept, the idea of dating,
Mhm.
or moving forward, or moving away, or whatever, just moving forward with your life. So that's kind of, it's there in my mind. Like I've kind of got it kind of sketched out how I want it to work. But I think because there's nothing out there, like, people have
Right.
experience. I mean, even your husband talking about the experience, the journey on the medical side.
Mhm.
There's a lot of talk about that, and how people have personally managed their grief. And there's a lot of books about grief, but there's nothing really out there, because I was looking for it, I couldn't find it,
Yep.
anything about the widowhood journey, and like
Okay.
what to expect on, and what you might go through.
So that is ambitious and that's a lot of work. Do you have a full-time job?
I do. Yeah.
So you're really, really pushing yourself here.
Yeah, it's again, I've got kind of an outline. I keep like adding in as I've got time to really start working on it. But yeah, my daughter's a senior in high school, and I've got like a 16-month-old baby that's learning, he's walking and getting into everything. So I'm
That's a fun
definitely
stage.
stretched. It is. It's yeah. So I'm pretty well stretched at the moment, but
Mhm.
it's not always going to be like this. So I figure I can
Well, I
cut
think
in.
too, it's really a matter of how much do you want to do something. I wrote my entire 5 book series with most of my 9 kids still at home.
Wow.
And I was teaching music lessons about 25 hours a week at the time. And, I think there were reasons it was vitally important to me. So in a way, I was probably running on adrenaline, stayed up till 1 in the morning, was up again at 6 and wrote every spare second, and it worked. So it's really, when people want to write a book, that's the biggest thing. You
Yeah,
have
the
to
motivation.
decide you're going to use the time to write the book. So
Right.
it works. And where can people find you online?
Well, like I said earlier, so I'm on Amazon. I've got my author page on Amazon, so you can just look it up, Lynne B. Stone. Or if you want to just Google "Till Death Do Us Part," Lynne B. Stone, you'll find the book immediately.
Okay.
I'd say look up "Till Death Do Us Part," but you'll find all kinds of weird things, some fiction,
Right.
some wedding materials. Yeah, but you can find me there. I'm also on Facebook. I've got an author page. Author Lynne B. Stone is my page on Facebook. So that's where I'm at right now.
Okay. Fantastic. People can find us at booksandbrews.net. We do both the full Books and Brews Hour podcast and Books and Brews Light that is on YouTube. You can find me at lauravosica.com. You can find our sponsor at gabrielshornpress.com. And you can see all our wonderful sheep, rabbits, and chickens, including the one we just had to give medical care to, at glenmurrellfarms.wordpress.com. So I don't have anything to click with, so I'll have to use the bottle. Cheers.